There is no relationship with Instagram. It's not relational. Have you ever tried to contact customer service? Like, you're not getting any customer service. So it's not relational. And so that means as humans, we don't have access to a symbiotic system. It's a one-way system that is taking and working through us and extracting from us. And so I say all this not to say we're all victims of this experience, but that if we're not cognizant of what actually is the relational dynamic, we'll wonder why we're depressed and anxious. And here we are living our dream of freedom, being entrepreneurs or creators, monetizing it, and not realizing that if your main source of income is one platform, you, as they would say, built a mansion in someone else's backyard. It's no different than patriarchal relational structures where women in history felt financially abused and constrained and imprisoned. You became the same thing. I became the same thing. And so sometimes we need to leave things to know that we can leave them, so that when we choose them, it's by choice. And that's, this reality in romantic relationships is that if you don't actually feel safe and free to leave a relationship, not that you want to, but just that is possible, you won't feel free to be yourself. So if you being you and expressing something that is deeply true for you that might rock the boat, but yet you can't survive on your own, you won't say the thing because you'll put survival ahead of truth and authenticity. That's a natural human tendency. And I'm seeing that play out on a massive level with social media.
That really resonated with me, that ability to know that you're safe, that if you don't feel safe knowing that you can exit a relationship, then you'll start to modify your own behavior, and you will disconnect from your true self, and you won't be authentic because of that fear that you're not going to be safe, and putting survival over authenticity, and how that's something that, is a human behavior that we do pretty much as children, especially if we don't feel safe growing up, either physically safe, emotionally safe. I just thought about how many women stay with men because, and that's not to say that the opposite isn't also true, but I think about my matriarchal lineage. I can think of so many women that are stuck. They're stuck because the man is either fighting for them materially. And I know that's such a big thing. And then I kind of projected out into how often we feel like we're stuck with somebody and we can't leave.
Right.
Either because physically or emotionally, we're getting something that we're being provided for.
Welcome to It's Not What You Think, the podcast that takes you on a transformative journey to rewrite your story of greatness and reawaken your soul's purpose. I'm your host, Celinne Da Costa, a subconscious mind expert, master coach, and believer in the limitless power and magic that lives within all of us. My intention in this podcast is to propel you into your next level of success so that you are free to create the life that your heart most desires. Through deep, actionable insights, personal stories, and world-class guests, I'll provide you with the tools, strategies, and resources you need to unlock the fullest expression of who you're meant to be in this lifetime so that you can consciously design a reality that is beyond what you could have ever dreamed of. Join me on this journey to personal growth and evolution, and let's live our lives in accordance with our highest soul's calling. This podcast is your weekly check-in to help this path become more simple, obtainable, and fun. Thank you for tuning in today, and now let's dive in.
Hello, family, and welcome. Today, I have a wonderful guest with me, Mark Groves, who is a human connection specialist. He's a speaker, an author, a coach, a podcast host, and the founder of Create the Love. And Mark and I are going to go down a rabbit hole of human connection, love and relationships, and social media, and somehow wrap all of it together for you in a way that is mind-bending, mind-opening, and is going to completely revolutionize your ideas on all these topics. So anyways, hi, Mark, and welcome.
Hi, I'm so excited. I love that you spoke into the future of our efficient tying together of all these threads.
Yeah, I was talking to Mark right before press record. I'm like, Mark, I have this internal conflict because I really want to talk to you. Mark is he's such a source of wisdom for relationships. His brand, Create the Love, if you haven't seen it already, it's just so wonderful. And I was following him for years as well before we got connected through a mutual friend. I'm like, I really want to talk to you about like love and relationships, but I also really, 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 really want to talk to you about social media. He has an account with over 1 million followers, and he recently got off of Instagram, which we're going to dive deep into. And I really want to talk about like the politics of social media and what it's doing to our brains and all those things. I'm like, Mark, can we make it all happen in one episode? And he was very confident about it. So I'm super excited. I don't know how, but I'm going to release the how, and I'm going to trust. And before I hand it over to Mark, just a really fun story about how we got connected. Mark and I have a couple of mutual friends, and most notably, one of them is Brandon Collingsworth, and the other one is Andre Carmack. And they're just the most beautiful brothers, most beautiful souls, like some of my closest brothers that I have. And I was talking to them about my my life and some like big transitions I've been going through in my life and business, in my relationship with social media. And both of them, independently of each other, were like, do you know Mark Rose? I'm like, I mean, I know of him. I haven't talked to him. He's like, you need to connect with him. And when I did, the light shone upon the valley of darkness, and I was like, oh, this is why I need to talk to you. And then when I talked to him, I'm like, we need to have a conversation where other people can be a fly on the wall, because this is really juicy. So anyways, without further ado, Mark, I hand it over to you to formally introduce yourself and tell us what you're currently up to, what you're most passionate about, before I start to grill you with questions.
Well, I look forward to it. So I've been deeply passionate in understanding humans, the human experience, human connection for my whole life. Like, that started really young, that my dad, who was and continues to be quite an inquisitive mind in human behavior, we would like sit on the couch and talk about my relationships, what's happening in the world. He always asks really great questions. And so it really led me to wanting to understand, ultimately for myself at first, why do I do what I do? How do I be better? When I stumbled upon positive psychology, that was like, oh my God, the study of like what makes people good instead of what makes people broken, which was such a different orientation for psychology. Instead of studying people who had problems, it was like, what is it that really effective, efficient, powerful, whatever word we want to use, people do? We should study them. And I was a pharmaceutical rep, actually, when all that journey began. And I was trying to figure out how to manipulate human behavior. Like, how do I get someone to change the product they use? And I went through a breakup, and I was like, wait, why am I so good at talking about everything but my feelings? This doesn't make any sense. So I went deep down the rabbit hole of romantic love. And that was now 18 years ago that started with a breakup. And then I started Create the Love and writing about relationships about 15 years ago. And that journey has just continued. We wanted to figure out, how do you talk about relationships and social media? Well, first, I met my wife on Instagram. So there is a merger of these things. That's the dating app no one talks about. But I think it's inevitable that, I say for every trigger you have, there's a troll farm for it. So social media itself is a great opportunity for reflection for where our healing has not been done yet, and continues to need to be done interpersonally. Because if you look at it, like, really at the core of our relational challenges is unhealed stuff from usually our childhood, but it doesn't have to be, but it's most often, as I'm sure most people know. But things that happen in culture, things that happen in our families. And so when you actually take a look at the way that humans are structured, we are not meant to be at social risk 24 hours a day. So like, if you and I are in a tribe and we're sitting around a fire and we both go to bed and we're not in a group talking, there's no longer a social risk for us, right? Like, we're not at risk. But if you have a profile, whether it's business or not, I just say it's amplified if you are your business, you are available for criticism 24 hours a day. So in the research, when people go on dates and they have their phone on the table face down, they're actually less vulnerable. When it's in their pocket, same thing. We all know when someone goes to take a crunch, they take their phone with them so they can go figure out what happened while they were busy in that conversation. So what happens is you have this mechanism, which is social media, which we just don't know how to relate to. And you have this people do not understand why they have so much anxiety. Well, of course you have anxiety. 24 hours a day, you can be criticized, you can be canceled. So there's no way to like take a pause from it. And we certainly have not been taught how to use it. So we'll find a way to figure all that through. But I'd say at the core of that is generally codependency and people pleasing. So
we're a minute 6 and you went right for the money.
we might as well just get into it, you know?
I love that. And there's so many things just from that, what you just shared, that I want to unpack. So let's take a step back and, just to give context, as I mentioned earlier in the conversation, I think it's important for people to know that you had a pretty massive social media account of over, 1 million people. And recently you quit Instagram and just stopped doing that. And, you and I had separate conversations around the codependency of Instagram and that how a lot of entrepreneurs have become codependent on Instagram, and basically started to lean on their livelihood, not just, their sense of being seen and their sense of being worthy, but also their livelihood has been leaning heavily on this platform. And I'm speaking Instagram, but I would say just general social media platforms. And so because I really want to unpack this piece around, codependency and the relational element of it. But would you be able to share with us before, like, just to give us that context, what led you to such a big decision? And what have you, I'm going to spoil it because I already know kind of some of the answers that you're going to give, but for the people, or anyone who's listening, why did you do this? What led you to this? And, let's just start there. And then I have more unpacking to do.
For me, I didn't know it was starting when it started, that feeling of like, oh, the seed. Now in hindsight, I can connect the dots. In 2021, maybe it was 2020, I was at a meeting. And I had been, at the time, like my Instagram had been blowing up. It was growing at like 40 to 100,000 people a month. Wow. So I was at the time, not 8 years into writing about relationships, but it was starting to like where I had, 100, 200, 300,000 followers. It was like growing very quickly. And I had a monthly overhead, probably something like 120 grand. And so, because I had marketers and social media manager and like all these different things, but I was writing, we were doing at that time, we were doing 3 posts a day. Wow. So here I am like pumping content out, doing launch after launch, but you have to keep doing stuff because you got an overhead of, a lot of money. And so I started to find myself working in order to pay people and kind of losing touch with, like, I still loved it and I loved what I was doing, but it was starting to become like a real, true, heavy, hard job that I went from, a job that I had flexibility in when I was a rep to working 24/7. Like, I don't think people really actually recognize, you think you're leaving a 9 to 5 for this dreamy experience, but you're actually you're on call 24/7, and the system is not capable of handling that for long. So I got to this place of burnout. I'm in this meeting. I've been desiring to like talk about more things. And the person in marketing said to me, Mark, people don't want to hear you talk about deeper things. Your audience wants you to talk about, breakups or why you date unavailable people or whatever. And I was like, I don't give a fuck. Like, I don't want to do it anymore. And I remember, not that I didn't want to talk about those things, but I wanted to talk about more. And this idea that I couldn't be all of me because it might jeopardize the business didn't work for me. It was like a real big, it was starting to like be a fracture or a split within me. So I remember having my head in my hands thinking to myself, like, if I keep going, something's going to happen. Like, I was actually afraid in that moment my mind was going to break. So I started crying because I was just overwhelmed. And I got home and I remember Googling psychotic break versus nervous breakdown. and just to try to figure out what it was I symptomatic of. I was thankful that I was neither of those things, but I could tell I was on the edge of both of those things. And that's where the seed was planted of like, I don't know how to be in relationship with this entity. And Instagram changed a lot over COVID, right? Like all of a sudden it became a place of censorship. It became a place of like, they started to copy TikToks. So TikTok is a content forward platform. They don't give a shit who you follow. They just show you videos that keep you on the platform. Instagram started to see this. So Instagram started to be a content forward platform. And anyone who's been on there a while knows they went from like a time lapse feed to now you get tons of ads, you get different people, suggested videos, because the way that the business makes money is they monetize your attention. So for me, about a year ago, 8 months ago, I was writing down, I was like, why do I resent this platform? And the reason that Instagram and Meta and TikTok are different energetically than YouTube is that YouTube pays its content creators. Now, we could argue whether that's a lot of pay or not. There still is a value exchange for what you're giving. So I started to write down, like, why do I feel resentful? Oh, I feel powerless. Why do I feel powerless? Oh my gosh, because if I say the wrong thing, I can lose everything. Nothing is ever enough. There's never enough content. If I take a break, I get punished, right? If I want to take a week off, it affects my algorithmic reach, et cetera, et cetera. The algorithm is a mystery. You'll never discover how it works. It's like always changing. And I love how even people who work for Meta are like, we don't know. Like, we're seeing that if you post 1 to 3 times, if you're starting to post reels, we're seeing that the algorithm likes that. I'm like, it's such a mind fuck. And so what happens is the more you start to curate your content to be able to perform better and do what the machine wants you to do, the more you become a conduit or a channel for the extraction of people's attention. Now, this doesn't mean that you can't create content you love. This doesn't mean you can't be a content creator. This doesn't mean any of those things. But what you have to be mindful of is that your body, if you start to stifle your own creativity to get reach, you will start to abandon your soul. And likely, if you create a business from your soul and your heart, you'll know that the journey back to that is a sacred one that you are very proud of. And here you are leaving it again. And that's that feeling that we have. So I just started to realize, like, I need to leave this. Like, I need to leave this. I've needed to leave it for a while. So I've been gone since July, the beginning of July. I was going to delete it. But then I got thousands of messages that were like, hey, can you just leave it up? Like, all your content, I have it bookmarked. And I realized that the way that I operate, which this is part of my healing, is that when I don't know how to relate to something, and I think this is true for a lot of people, I reject it. Like, I move away from it. I'm done with it because I don't know how to be in healthy relationship to it. Now, here's the caveat to that. Is like, I'm sober. I don't drink because me and alcohol love to party. And I do not necessarily have great discernment and choice with it. I didn't quit because I woke up in a ditch. I quit because it was disconnecting me from myself. And I'm starting to see that when people ask me, like, how do you have a healthy relationship to Instagram or Meta? I'm like, it's not really designed for you to have a healthy relationship with it, but there is a way to relate to it that is the most informed for your nervous system, but also really informed for your self-worth and for your creativity. And so like that journey all overlapped while my wife and I wrote a book called Liberated Love, and I was healing codependency on like a much deeper level. And I started to see that the way that Instagram and Meta relates to its creators and users is it's everything I described before is exactly the description of an abusive relationship. You want to get into a relationship with a narcissist, you'll experience all those things. The like a little bit of virality, we take it away. The mystery is still there. A little love bombing, we take it away. And I was speaking to Stephen Porges, who I think would be considered probably one of the world's foremost experts on the nervous system and the creator of polyvagal theory. And he was saying, not only do you have this 24/7 experience where you can be available for criticism, he said, which makes the nervous system hypervigilant. He said, you're being assessed by a non-human entity, an algorithm, 24 hours a day. And he said, so you're actually being judged and graded 24 hours a day. And I was thinking like, well, yeah, the massive difference between if you and I are in a relationship and I'm experiencing relational dysfunction is that I could say to you, hey, what you're doing sucks. Doesn't feel good for me. Here's my boundary. Here's my request. And our relationship would change or it would dissolve. There is no relationship with Instagram. It's not relational. Have you ever tried to contact customer service? The only way you can actually, like if your account gets suspended by accident, you get flagged for something by accident, you have to know somebody who knows someone at Meta. Like you're not getting any customer service. So it's not relational. And so that means as humans, we don't have access to a symbiotic system. It's a one-way system that is taking and working through us and extracting from us. And so I say all this not to say we're all victims of this experience, but that if we're not cognizant of what actually is the relational dynamic, we'll wonder why we're depressed and anxious. And here we are living our dream of freedom, being entrepreneurs or creators, monetizing it, and not realizing that if your main source of income is one platform, you, as they would say, built a mansion in someone else's backyard. It's no different than patriarchal relational structures where women in history felt financially abused and constrained and imprisoned. You became the same thing. I became the same thing. And so sometimes we need to leave things to know that we can leave them so that when we choose them, it's by choice. And that's, this reality in romantic relationships is that if you don't actually feel safe and free to leave a relationship, not that you want to, but just that is possible, you won't feel free to be yourself. So if you being you and expressing something that is deeply true for you that might rock the boat, but yet you can't survive on your own, you won't say the thing because you'll put survival ahead of truth and authenticity. That's a natural human tendency. And I'm seeing that play out on a massive level with social media. So that was a very long rant.
No, it was a good one. It's got nuggets. I'll work backwards because one of the things the thing that you just shared that really resonated with me is, that ability to know that you're safe, that if you don't feel safe knowing that you can exit a relationship, then you'll start to modify your own behavior, and you will disconnect from your true self and you won't be authentic because of that fear, that you're not going to be safe, and putting survival over authenticity, and how that's something that, is a human behavior that we do pretty much as children, especially if we don't feel safe growing up, either physically safe, emotionally safe. And one of the things that it really hit me in my heart when you were sharing this, is like, I just thought about how many women stay with men and that's not to say that the opposite isn't also true, but I think about my matriarchal lineage. I can think of so many women in my family that are stuck. They're stuck because there is, the man is either providing for them materially. And I know that's such a big thing. And then I kind of like projected out into how often we feel like we're stuck with somebody and we can't leave.
Right.
Either because physically or emotionally, like we're getting something that we're being provided for. And to add on to them, something you mentioned about Instagram, that it's basically like being in a relationship with a narcissist. This is a word that gets thrown around like freaking popcorn in today's like spirituality pop culture. And so it'd be really great if you could define for us when you use that word, what does that actually mean? And what does it mean for somebody like who, I'm sure that, they're going to see themselves either in social media in that relationship or also relationally. How do you know that it's happening,
Yeah, such a great question because, of course, it does get thrown around. And there's a great book by Dr. Ramani called It's Not You, and that's for people surviving narcissistic abuse. But I think it's valuable for everyone to read because it, one, builds your real toolkit for relational self-awareness. But we all have narcissistic tendencies. And when we look at what pop culture or psychology, not psychology, but what like Instagram psychology calls narcissism, is often avoidance. So like when someone has a more avoidant attachment style, we'll just code that as narcissism. And I think there's many layers to this. So anyone who has truly been through a relationship with a narcissist, this is not dismissing their experience. And if you have been through one, you know you've been through one. It's pretty obvious. And there's so many good documentaries now on relational fuckery that you can learn about it. But there's one that is, it's where the guy what is it called? It's so good. It's a Netflix one where the guy becomes friends with one woman and totally catfishes the other chick. Oh man. Anyways, I'll have to.
Swindler, is it?
Yes, the Tinder swindler. That is a great example of overt narcissism. So on the very far spectrum of avoidance is narcissism. And at the deepest parts of narcissism is a lack of empathy, right? That's how we think about it, right? If you hear someone, narcissists are void of empathy. So a narcissist, and there are some really actually fascinating things we can go on another thread, which is that when people participate in short-term mating strategies, which is really fascinating, we'll come back to narcissism, I promise. And because of the birth control pill, that's obviously led women to be able to do that because they can control their ovulation. And there's less there's less risk for promiscuity, but no judgment with that word. When we participate in short-term mating strategies, narcissists, sociopaths, psychopaths, and sadists are more successful at them. So women who participate in short-term mating strategies, again, no judgment, expose themselves to more narcissists, sadists, psychopaths, and sociopaths. So you actually put yourself at more risk of being in relationship with those types of people because they tend to be like more charismatic, more externally focused, more all those things. So that is a whole other thread we can get back to. The second side, though, is that, so let's get back to the original part, which is if you think about narcissism as being void of empathy, then a machine that is algorithmic and just deciding that you're either good or bad, worthy or not, it has no empathy. It doesn't care about your feelings. It has no concern for your feelings. And when you look at relationally, what happens in a relationship with a narcissist? Often there's the use of love bombing, right? So love bombing hooks into the part of us who is still living out the fantasy of being chosen and loved. So we often talk about, okay, well, I was in a relationship with a narcissist. Here's what a narcissist is. My question always then becomes, why are you a match for one? What is the energetic hook that is within us that is possible for that to happen? Now, what goes in relationship, when I think about like my own relationship with Instagram and having built a business on it, is that I depended on my survival for it, right? So if we think about that within relationship where we're with someone who is providing, we are giving up something to be in that relationship. Now, that doesn't have to be true. There are always covert or unspoken codependent hooks that exist in relationship. But what has to happen is we have to make explicit the things that are happening implicitly. For example, my wife is an entrepreneur too. We just had a son. He's 19 months old. My wife stopped working. I'm working and paying for everything. My wife and I have these conversations. So I was like, listen, I know you're not working. I'm working. I'm familiar with all the dynamics relationally that happen when a man pays or a woman pays or whatever. What is it? What amount of money do you need in a bank account that only you have access to that makes your body feel like you have safe and full access to your voice? So there was a number. So there's an account I have no access to, has cash in it, and I don't take it personally because I don't care. To me, it's more like, how do we make explicit what is already implicit in all our relational dynamics? Now, when you are in a relationship, like I was with Instagram, and I'm giving up my self-expression in order to maintain my business, I'm exhibiting and living the prostitute archetype, which is I'm willing to sell myself and sell out some of my values, principles, or truths in order to maintain this relationship. Now, that was a conflict I was having during COVID because I was speaking out about a lot of the fuckery I was seeing psychologically and a lot of the stuff I was seeing having been a rep for 14 years. And that was causing a lot of issues in my algorithmic reach, of course. And what was fascinating, so getting back to the narcissistic paradigm, is I would say to the person who worked at Meta that I knew that was supposed to be my account manager, I put in air quotes because there was no account management. And I said to her, I'm being shadow banned and I've done nothing. I've got no flags, no shadow banning isn't a thing. I'm like, yeah, okay. Like, I'm getting 250 to 500,000 views on a video. This is 4 years ago. And I'm getting 3, 4, 5, 600,000, a million on a post. And you're telling me now I'm at 40. I used to get 40 to 60,000 story views. I'm at 5,000. Come on. Like, I'm not. So the gaslighting, like, my reality isn't real. And what has to happen whenever we are told that our reality isn't real is I either have to decide that I'm going to live in a world where lies are the truth, or I'm going to stay connected to the truth. Now, most of us as children were taught, because we were told the family doesn't talk about the issues. We're told when we bring something up, children are to be seen, not heard. There's a lot of reasons that we forego being an authority over ourselves. We're raised in a religious family. We're starting to ask questions about, let's say, Christianity, and we're told that's not faith. So we have to disconnect from what we're seeing as reality. It's like when you catch someone on their phone and you could tell they're cheating. It's fucking obvious. And then you say something to them and they say, you were looking through my phone? What are you doing violating my trust? That picture's from a long time ago. That's not from, that's just a friend. You're always so worried about things. Like, why do you have so many trust issues? Oh, your dad really hurt you, didn't he? So our reality is destabilized. And what happens is it's because there's an access point within us that still doesn't trust ourselves fully. So I would say all these are invitations to step into fucking sorcery and to power and to actually recognize, like, your body is trying to tell you something. Does it mean you need to leave Meta? Maybe. But maybe it actually means you need to know that you can. Because any relationship, like, if you don't have access to know in your life, in any context, in anything, then your yes is bullshit. Your yes is filled with small print. And that's not to shame anybody, but it's to call into the reality that if we're to look at the 4 agreements, which is a fantastic book, and one of the agreements is you are your word. So I was working with this woman who said, you know, find myself not attracted to, like, really good men. And I keep being in relationship with these men who don't want more. And I have these other men who want more from me that I don't want more. And she said, and I said, well, you're still in all these, like, relationships with guys that you're friends with, the dudes who want more from you, who want to bang you. And then you got a bunch of dudes you want to bang. And they don't want to be in a relationship with you. They might bang you, but they don't want to be in a relationship with you. I said, you have to say no to all of them. You have to actually, like, get clear and in integrity the actual relationship that needs to be being lived with them. Because till you do that, your yes, you won't even recognize him because you're not ready to choose him. Because when the choice is made, you still have these small print relationships that you tolerate less, which of course was learned from her relationship with her father, that he kind of showed up, he was kind of around, and she's always wanted more, and he just gives her enough. And it's like, you will not resolve your relationship with your father till you resolve these relationships with these men. And then you'll just recognize that your father just is who he is. And then you can find a man that can really show up. So I know I told you we'd be able to somehow connect these things together.
You know, what you're sharing right now, it reminds me, I have a friend of mine, he was also on this podcast, and he's a really incredible coach. His name is Rich Litvin. And there's something that he always says. He's like, fire all your clients that are less than a 10 out of 10. And you only take people on that are 10 out of 10. And if you want to be an excellent coach, 10 out of 10 clients, no less. Like, work with people who scare you. And, you know, when he said that, you could just, it's like you see people just, what do you mean? Because that's my, like, source of money. Like, what are you talking about?
Right.
And people just, it's like one of the most, it's funny. Every time he says it, it's just full proof that someone's jaw is gonna drop. But it's reminding me of that, where it's like we're saying yes to all of these things, and we're allowing all these tiny little energy leakages to take place. And because we're saying yes to all these things, our energy is going yes to all these things. And then our discernment gets really muddled up. And then we're not actually saying yes to the thing that we really, really want because we're silencing our voice. And I feel, you could speak into this probably more articulately than I can, but my feeling as you're speaking into this is just that it's similar with social media. It's kind of like, well, I can get seen here, or I can get my a certain level of need met here, but not fully trusting ourselves to be able to fully operate without it. I mean, even if we look at it from both a business and personal standpoint, a lot of people don't. Yeah, like a lot of people are on social media, and many people, I would go as far as to argue, especially the ones who have ties to the digital world, don't really know how to function without it. I've seen, it's interesting because ever since I've been in this deep contemplation of, how do I want to be on social media myself since the beginning of the year, I've met a lot of people who are not on it, and I have no interest in it. And also their work allows them, like there's no, doctors and people who have practices that are just completely independent. And I'm realizing this is very much a symptom of people who are digital nomads, who are in the online world, who do much of their work remotely. So, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that, as well as a thread that I want to resurrect from the beginning of this conversation. I want to pull on that thread again. You started to talk about codependency, and I was like, oh, this is really juicy. So this is the moment where I'd love for you to elaborate more on that.
Yeah, so my wife and I's book, Liberated Love, is on healing codependent patterns and creating the love you desire. Now, the idea, so how we define codependency in the book is that it is any relational dynamic where we source safety at the expense of ourselves, our own needs, our own wants, let's say our self-expression. And so think about it, person where we do it at the expense of ourselves, but it's with any relational dynamic with something or someone. So it doesn't have to be a human. It could be what we're in, it could be a substance, right? Where we're actually like giving up aspects of ourselves to maintain that thing. Now, I would argue that most humans do that till they don't, because part of our design, of course, is that we need other people. So when someone's like, well, the healing of codependency is ultimately, am I being selfish? And it's like, no, you're being a self, and then you're able to be in relationship as a self. But evolutionarily, I mean, the first 7 years, 8 years of our lives, we're learning unconsciously mainly who to be in order to create safety and be part of a family and a community and a culture, etc. And so at some point, we have to decide, are the programs that we took on programs we want or not? Because we wake up at 25, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, that we've been living a life that we were taught to want and we don't want it. And I would argue that all addictive substances, the access point to the overuse of them is, and we could argue that some are more addictive. Sure, there's the properties that are within them and the way they work that make us addicted. But when you are fully embodied in yourself, there is no hook to run from you. And what I mean by that is when you start to get sober, you start to be with yourself. And Gabor Mate talks about how the wrong question is why the addiction, the right question is why the pain. So I would argue that at the real source of why we are not fully in choice in our relationship to social media and whatever it might be, is that it's hooking into a part of us that is not fully yet embodied, or we've left again. So when you abandon yourself, you create pain. And I was reading actually a comment on a YouTube video that I did this morning. And the comment said that I'm waiting for him to either love me or leave me. And the woman went into their relational dynamic. And first off, I was like, this person is dumping their whole life in a comment on YouTube, which that is like, first off, no one's earned the right to their story on YouTube, but they're like almost saying, he hasn't told me he loves me. He's great though. And we like have a really intimate connection. I've been waiting years for him to love me or leave me. And I'm like, no, you're not. You're waiting for, if he leaves you, it's just going to reopen a wound that you didn't leave him earlier. Because when someone is in that state of ambivalence, it shows up as I'm waiting for him to finally show up. It's such a projection. It's I'm waiting for me to finally show up. I was working with a client the other day, a CEO, and he was talking about how he has guilt when he stands in boundaries with interpersonal relationships. Work-wise, no problem. Interpersonally, he has problem. He gets guilt. Raised, took care of his little brothers and sisters. His needs came last. All the stuff, sort of tracks. And he said, I have guilt. And I'm like, well, there's two things there. One, you can learn how to hold more guilt so that it's not a frenetic energy that makes you engage in a collapsing behavior. Because guilt is usually the mechanism for which we've abandoned ourselves. Secondly is you have to start to recode the feeling of guilt as not being guilt that you're letting someone else down or you might, but actually guilt that you're feeling is because you continue to let yourself down. And when you actually stand up for yourself, the guilt you're feeling is that you could have all along. Now, the reality is that you couldn't have, because if you're 4 and you tried to stand up for yourself and it meant more pain, you're not going to. But at some point, the adult has to show up in these relationships and say, I'm no longer going to stand for that. And this isn't about being the center of the universe and everyone having to oscillate around you. But it's about, like, relationally, it would be about 2 universes relating to one another that don't require the collapse of, maybe it's a black hole if we're keeping with the metaphor. No one requires a black hole. That it's like 2 universes that are honored as separate, but come together to create, like, what we see.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it's really profound. It's got me thinking of like the other different rabbit holes that I want to take you on with this one, because you're hitting on something that what's coming up for me and through me is the dilemma of, anxious avoidant attachment and how many people suffer from that. And, even when you're talking about the narrative of, I'm waiting for the commenter, I'm waiting for him to change. I'm waiting for him to show up. I mean, when you're sharing that, I'm having like my mental library is going through like clients and friends and peers. And it's like, and I can think of so many times where that story has been told. It's just like the main characters change and the context changes.
Right.
But that is such like a leading narrative of people just being locked in these anxious avoidant dynamics or disorganized attachment dynamics. And I'll leave it to you to, it'd be awesome if you can define what they are for people who are like, have not heard of attachment theory. But it has me thinking of this deep frustration that I feel, similar to you. I'm really obsessed with human behavior and how we can get people to connect to each other. For me, the vehicle that I'm really passionate about is just communication. Like, how can people really, truly, authentically communicate with one another? And a frustration that I find myself feeling is this like, how do we explain to people what is actually going on in their internal world and how to better how to self-manage their, how does an anxious person, how can they self-manage themselves? And an avoidant person, how can they self-manage ourselves? And for the people who are truly committed to who, number one, have realized that they're locked in that codependent, anxious, avoidant, disorganized attachment pattern, like, what is the way out for someone who's listening and maybe has read the attachment books, is replaying, that dynamic on social media? I'd really love if we can give them some light at the end of the tunnel. Anyone who's listening, it's like, I could really use some advice on this right now. But before you do, if you could also define, just for anyone who's like, I'm not super familiar with anxious, avoidant, disorganized, if you could also just define what we're speaking into here.
Yeah. So attachment as a way of systemizing how we relate. I think it's one of the most brilliant ways of doing that, because it makes we're like, oh my God, that makes so much sense. That's why I do what I do. So the research originally was from a guy named John Bowlby, and he actually he observed a toddler playing in a room, mom's in the room, mom leaves the room and mom comes back, and they see how the baby interacts with mom. So first one, mom leaves the room, mom comes back, baby's like, goes to mom, is like, oh my God, I need you, doesn't leave mom's side. So when you leave, I don't trust that you're going to come back, so I'm going to stay close to you. Anxious attachment. Mom leaves, mom comes back, baby reunites with mom, goes and plays. I trust you. Thanks for coming back and repairing. I'm here. I'm going to go. That's secure attachment. Mom leaves, mom comes back. Baby's like, didn't even really notice you were gone. No big deal. Avoidant attachment. What's actually going on in that child is the same physiological response as the baby who clung to mom. It's just the way they responded to the lack of security with mom was to actually become more disassociated. So when we think of adult relationships, in codependency, you would think the person who self-abandons as more the anxious attached, the person who we're trying to fix or change or get to be different that we're adapting to as the more avoidant. So again, more ways of systemizing how we relate. So I like to think of attachment as not being your relationship to another person, but your relationship to space with another person. So anxious people, when there's too much space, chase. Avoidant people, when there's not enough space, run. Now, the mindfuckery of the world is that anxious people tend to find themselves in relationship with avoidant people and vice versa because it validates our view of the world. When I get too close, people distance and I can't trust them. Well, of course, we're reliving our wounds. So it's the validation of the relationship we had, probably with our mother mainly, but also our father. The other one, when people get too close, they need too much. I start to lose myself. So the only way I know how to retain myself is to distance more. So if you look, if both people stopped leaving their energetic body and the relationship, they could actually start to turn towards each other. Because if you think about it metaphorically, one person is always facing kind of like, one foot is kind of like, if shit goes down, see ya. And whoever actually puts the relationship on the line or is more likely to leave actually holds the power in the relationship dynamic. Now, the other person is like, instead of facing front forward, they're actually completely turned towards the partner. So they actually don't have a full self. They're willing to actually orient to the partner over themselves. So if you think about it, at the basis of anxious attachment is my partner's needs matter more than my own. Now that we could say about any relationship, it doesn't have to be romantic because it'll show up in work, it'll show up with parents, it'll show up with friends. Avoidant, my partner's needs matter less than my own, and secure attachment would be my partner's needs matter as much as my own. Now listen, you're not destined to a life of fuckery. If you have a certain attachment style that is generally determined by the age of 2, you can change it. So you can become what we call earned secure. So before I even jump into that, there's a different form of attachment, disorganized, as you mentioned, where let's say I get you and you're like, hey, oh my God, I love you. And you're like, oh, wait, I'm not into this. Like I'm not used to you turning back towards me. Can you tell me, maybe give me a little bit of coldness? That would actually make me feel a little more familiarity. And we start to distance. So we go from anxious to avoidant. So we like get the person and then we're like, actually. And I was like that in my 20s. After a deep betrayal in my early 20s, I became more disorganized. I wanted relationship. I really desired it. And you see this with people who have experienced trauma. They want closeness. They want love, but it's not safe. And so love leads to pain. And if you think about it, for all of those attachment styles other than secure, it's not a trust in love. It's not a trust in connection. It's not a trust in closeness. So when we start to look at how that shows up in our lives, it shows up pretty significantly in our romantic relationships because by the brilliance of our wound, we will keep recreating it till we resolve it. And if you think about it, it's like that saying, nothing changes when nothing changes. So we have to start to change how we orient. So like for an anxious person, when we bring in how does the nervous system, because at the core of all of this is your nervous system, which is constantly saying, is this safe or not? It's constantly surveying all relationships at all times and all circumstances. For anxious people, it's hypervigilant. It's like on extra. It's like at 180%. And for some people, 1,000%. So they can never actually exhale because they're always trying to predict the future and then they're never in the now. Now, what happens is that on a nervous system level, anxious people have a really hard time co-regulating, or self-regulating. They have a hard time sitting with their own feelings. And you know this frenetic energy in dating when they're not sure where they fit, or they haven't heard back from someone, and then they text them again. And then they text them again. And now they've pushed someone away because they can't hold the frenetic energy of the uncertainty. And maybe they're dating people who naturally make them feel like there's a distance. They're not dating secure people who communicate well. And when that person shows up, it's not familiar. They don't know how to trust it. They know their own dance much better. For someone who's avoidantly attached, they have a hard time co-regulating. So they have a hard time being with the nervous system of someone else. So the healing of all of this can happen, by changing your behaviors, which I think a real simple question, which is going to sound like maybe simplifying it too much, is you would really just ask yourself in each moment, if I was enough, what would I do? If I believed in myself, what would I do? If I loved myself, what would I do? And you have to commit on such a high level to that. Now, the practices to help the nervous system are things like, this is why cold plunging or cold water exposure is so good, because your body is saying, you're going to die. But yet you're just in a cold shower. You're not going to die. So you can start to observe your body's response to things where it's coding emergency, where it's not an emergency. It just builds more self-awareness of your somatic being your body's experience. Working with a somatic therapist is really powerful. When you're working with a coach or a therapist, you're really co-regulating. You're like, as long as the coach or therapist themselves is a regulated human being. And I would say not all of them are. Does that answer your question?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love this. And, even I love that you mentioned somatic therapy. I was doing oh my God, almost a decade of personal development work, mindset, emotional learning, emotional regulation tools, learning the theory, studying. And Mark, there is I can't tell you, when I got a somatic therapist, in 1 year, I feel like I moved 5 years worth of me studying.
So change.
It's an absolute game changer. And, as somebody who grew up very much in my mental body, the process of embodiment and taking that journey has been so mind-blowing for many reasons. But this piece around the nervous system, what I realized, and, for anyone who I share this, for anyone who might relate to this, is I got so frustrated because I'm like, I know better. I know better than this. I've studied better. I've read the books. I've talked to the people. I've talked to the coaches. I've done this work. Why am I continuing to recreate the same reality? And when I started working with a somatic therapist, it's like, oh, it's my nervous system. I am not conscious of this. It doesn't matter how smart I am, how well educated, how many tantra workshops I've been to, how many books I've read on attachment style. This really comes down to being in a space with someone who is very aware of what's happening in the nervous system and having the ability to co-regulate through a really difficult experience, when the person, which, would be typically the one that's causing the anxiousness or the avoidance, whoever that person that is the trigger, most of the times does not, if you're in a dysfunctional dynamic, that person does not have the capacity to hold you and to be with you. However, you still need to co-regulate. And your friend might be able to be like, he's an asshole, or fuck her, or whatever the thing is, and she can do that, or your friend can be there for you in that way. But to have somebody who can be there and hold that space for you and co-regulate with the awareness of what is going on in your nervous system and how to lead you through that, it's absolute gold. Hello, soul family. I hope you're loving this episode so far. Before we dive back in, I'd love to share with you one of my most popular and beloved free resources on how to stand out and magnetize your dream clients with your irresistible story. Because here's the thing, you have a powerful story inside of you. There's no doubt about that. But the question is, are you telling it in a way that empowers you? And not only that, that connects with and compels your audience. Whether you are a business owner or a leader who's in charge of influencing others, this masterclass will propel you in the direction of becoming someone who tells compelling stories that change people's lives, starting with your own. This is the secret sauce to standing out in a crowd of sameness and being seen as a go-to expert. Because here's the truth. If you don't own your story, it will own you. So if you're ready to step into your truth and tell your story unapologetically and confidently without the wobbles, start here. Go to the show notes or type in the link CelineDaCosta.com/free masterclass to dive in. Enjoy. And now let's get back into the episode.
Yeah, it moves you much quicker, I think, because a lot of our suffering, a lot of our pain is actually pre-verbal. So we actually don't have words for it. Like the way to resolve it is not through talking. And that's why you see all these other powerful modalities on top of somatic therapy. You know, you've got EMDR, you've got different ways that people are doing interventions. I mean, you have people going on psychedelic experiences that are experiencing, rapid healing too through that. So, I think everyone, for me, different journeys or different layers of my healing have required different teachers and different healers, and different things have been resolved. It's kind of interesting. I think, if we look up our family tree, we're like one of the first generations, or one of, very few that actually has had the ability to hit pause from desperation for survival for the most part. Of course, obviously that's going to be different for different people's circumstances. And I recognize even the privilege in that statement, but it's like my parents were at survival stages in their childhoods where my mom's dad died when she was young. My dad lived very poor too. And then when I grew up, we grew up like, I would say probably like lower middle class, and money was a concern. And it's not that money isn't a thought or a concern in my life today. It's just that my parents afforded me the opportunity to finally ask questions about what I inherited and why our family had addictive patterns and why I was living those out. And so it is an honor, and like, it is such a disservice to your own integrity of your own becoming to not confront the things that you have the capacity to confront now. And I would argue that, well, one, if it's showing up for you, I do really believe that you can handle whatever you're handed. And it's like, for me, a lot of the things that feel dysregulating or like too much, I'm having to learn practices to hold more. I'm having to learn, like, everything is inviting me to become more. And I remember saying to a mentor of mine, Sherry Salata, who used to be the producer of Oprah, and like for 30 years, she was the president of the O Network. And I said to her, what is, like, you got Eckhart on speed dial. Like, what is it that all of these teachers, what do you think is the common thing that they all give? And she said that you don't need them. And then she was like, actually, let me correct that. That you need them to remind you that you don't. And there's a great quote from Terrence McKenna where he talks about how, let me just pull it up because it's so good. Here it is. Nature loves courage. You make the commitment and...
Sorry, I don't want
to...
It is one of my favorite quotes of all time. I'm so happy you brought this up. Yes, please share it. Please share it.
Nature loves courage. You make the commitment, and nature will respond to that commitment by removing impossible obstacles. Dream the impossible dream, and the world will not grind you under. It will lift you up. This is the trick. This is what all these teachers and philosophers who really counted, who really touched the alchemical gold, this is what they understood. This is the shamanic dance in the waterfall. This is how magic is done, by hurling yourself into the abyss and discovering it's a featherbed. For me, this is everything. It's like, that's the level of trust. You either trust that life is working for you as long as you're working with it, or you don't. And that's okay. I don't give a shit what people choose. I just choose the belief that empowers you. One, you're the victim of, And so we have to see, even as hard as it is, even as hard as it's been for me, is like, the other day I made a request for something from like a previous podcast host, that our guest that I had. And I made the request to his assistant to book him. And she was like, oh yeah, we'll add you to the wait list. And I was thinking, fuck, like I already had him on, like bump me up that, And I remember just like being in that moment, like, I think that the path to, like, let's say more podcast growth or something is having him on. And the universe is saying to me, that's not true. And I have to trust that. And, it's like that idea of The Secret is you like put a fucking red bike on a vision board and then you get a red bike. And it's like, no, fate will not work for you if you don't meet it. If your trajectory is not headed towards the thing you desire, you don't fucking get it. Because like, you have to actually do the work to say it matters. And in the book, Think and Grow Rich, he has this process where you have to write out 6 steps. Like, what do you want? When do you want it? But one of the most important questions in this process is, what the fuck are you willing to give up to get that thing? Like, what are you giving in exchange? No shit is free. You want to be saved? What are you doing about it? You want to get riches? What are you doing about it? What value are you bringing? And I think we forget that a lot. And I've forgotten that a lot. It's like, why did you start? What is the nature of your work? What are you here for? And we like to think, not me, I'm meant to be a person who works in this office who's doing work that I don't love. That's just what I'm supposed to do. And it's like, actually, maybe we need you to get the value from that disconnection that you're experiencing of an empty life where you think, I should just be grateful for what I have. Have you ever fucking heard that? When you say to someone like, I want more, and they're like, you already have. Like, be grateful for what you have. And you're like, but I don't want it. And so it's like we get to wake up to that space or the dissonance, because they're insert addiction. Because that's like, well, you know what I'm going to need? I'm going to need to crush a ton of beers and talk about bullshit so that I don't have to pay attention to the fact that I'm now aware that I'm disconnected from my true reason for being here. And I think it shifts, you know? And Sherry said to me, I was like, man, I feel like every time I learn something, I feel like I want the onion to get smaller, but I feel like I do it. I'm like trying to reach, you know, a center or a core of self-actualization or whatever the fuck I'm trying to do. And she was like, why don't you just think of that every time you heal something, you actually take up more space? That instead of a layer coming off, a layer gets added on. That you know, and that's such a different way of thinking about it. Like your totality, who you are when you walk in a room, that the integrity to which you're living walks in before you because you're doing the work. That the thing, the red bike you desire, whatever that red bike represents, meets you there because you're in the room where it is, that you're listening to the nudges, you know? And I think that's just, we get so infused with technology, and not that it can't be part of divinity. Of course it can. We created it, you know, with, or God created, or whatever your belief system is. But it's like, how do we work alongside it? Because the moment you start to curate yourself for it, you're fucked. And I use that language because it's real. You know, I wrote a post on Substack a couple weeks ago that, you know, went, I mean, at least relative to my experience, it went viral. It did well. And it was interesting because it's like the overlap of codependency with social media. So as a creator, I read someone say, I did a post on Substack and I lost a bunch of followers and I'm feeling like failure. And I wrote, if you lose followers because you posted something from your heart, you didn't do it wrong. The unhealed child sees disconnection due to authenticity as being a fault of the self, and thus starts to filter themselves to preserve connection. Feeding an algorithm and trying to dance for followers is just codependency dressed up as content creation. This doesn't mean you can't be strategic. It just means abandoning yourself in the process is not brand strategy. It's a survival strategy masquerading as content curation. The healed adult creates from the heart. They're willing to lose people to maintain connection and integrity with themselves. I always write this from my own self-reflection. I was like, oh, fuck, I became a hack, which is a statement from Stephen Pressfield's book, where he says, like, hack is like a politician who checks the polls before he takes a position. It's like, what do my readers want to read? No, what the fuck do I want to write? That is a way different. That's the birth of art. And think about how much art doesn't get created because we don't think someone will fucking like it or share it or will go viral, instead of just writing what we are called to write.
Wow. I love this. You know, what was coming through when you were talking about Substack is I actually had a bit of a self-reflection when I started on Instagram in 2016. I remember I used to write long form, and I used to write, I like off the bat, I'm like, I really want to write. And I remember people being, this was a time where you just would put it like in a little, like, just chillin', like water emoji. You know, today everybody's and their mother is a microblogger. But back then I remember multiple people telling me, nobody's going to read your stuff. Like, it's just, you're writing too much. And you know, the punchline is that I ended up actually growing my following, traveling the world, like telling stories about myself, telling stories about people. And that became, you know, my edge. It was like, okay, she's writing stories like on her Instagram, and it read like a storybook. And I remember at the time it was, people would ask me, what's your strategy? And I would tell them my strategy is writing a storybook that I can read to my children. And it was so naive and so pure, and I look back at that younger version of myself, like, wow, that's so sweet. Like, I'm like, if you ask me now, I need to post 3 reels and I need to like comment this so that my many reels chat, like freaking workflow will go off. And, it's become a much more business machinery. But I think, what I'm sharing this is because I can see my ways that, I'm a born writer. I've been writing, like when I wrote my first book, which will never see the light of day. I was 10 years old, and I'm
Wow.
writing pages
I
and
did
pages.
not write a book at 10.
Yeah, it was 150 pages of a book. I remember exactly. I'm not going to bore anyone with the topic, but it was a fun little. It's cute. It was cute, and yeah, I was in that process of writing and realized that as the algorithm started to refine, I was like, oh, I got to keep it to 2,200 captions, and I would want to say something longer. And part of, in the past year, part of my journey towards like reclaiming my voice has been to, fuck it, I need to write long form. I cannot contain this thing I want to say to 2,200 characters. And even with the podcast, it's like, I don't want to do a 2-minute reel. I want to have these full-blown conversations that can take as long as they need to take for us to really get to the meat of what needs to be said. And I know that so many people, it's like that stifling of our voice and not speaking into our authenticity and dancing for, metaphorically, like monkey dance, for the performance of likes, or, being able to sustain our business. And man, like I have been down that road, and it's a road that I've been like very meticulously, and we've had separate conversations about this, like really like, wow, how do I reclaim the way that I originally write, the way I say the things that I want to say because I want to say it, not because it's
Same.
like
Yeah,
top
same.
of content, But it's been one of the things with social media, and I totally love what you said about when we don't know how to relate to something. I share this with you. It's like, oh, let me just get rid of it. Like throw the baby out with the bath, I don't know how to deal with this, so let me just disappear. I totally have that pattern as well. And I've been really sitting with, and one of the reasons why I haven't completely shut down my social media, but rather have my team like supporting me with promoting the podcast and whatnot, is because I'm kind of been sitting like, how do I navigate this? And, it's been difficult because my primary observation of like almost a year of being like, how do I gracefully exit this stage and, or like, rearrange my relationship with social media so that it is supportive rather than it being life has been like, wow, this really fucks with your discernment. It
really does.
really muddles clarity of thought. And that has been my primary observation, and even bringing it back full circle to what you were sharing in the beginning of, even when, you have that meditation practice and you have that self-discipline, it's so easy to just scroll and be like, oh, there's somebody who's performing better than me, or, oh, I should have said this thing in this way. And it's such an it's a thing that happens like so subconsciously that you don't even, that moment. I don't know if you've had these moments where you're feeling crunchy and you're like, oh, what's that anxiety in my stomach? Like, what's going on here? And then you track it, and I'll be like at the gym, I'm like, why am I anxious right now? And then I'll track it. I'll be like, it was from this morning when I scrolled and then I thought that thing about myself.
Right.
And in a world where discernment is already difficult to achieve because discernment comes from embodiment. And for you to embody, you need to embody, and all the principles you've been talking about. I found that it's very easy to kind of get blown away in the wind when it comes to discernment. So I'm curious if you have thoughts on, for the people who are like, okay, I hear everything you're saying and I'm on board, but I don't really want to, I'm not ready. I don't want to get rid of my social media account, like I'm not there yet.
Yeah.
And that might not even be the best, for some, they're like, oh my God, thank you so much for the permission. I've been waiting for this for a lifetime. For other people, they're like, yeah, sounds good. All of this sounds good, but no, not for me. What would you say is like the middle path for people who are listening and they don't want to get wrapped up in a toxic codependent relationship, but also don't necessarily want to get off social media? Like, what's the solution there?
Well, it's like when I have someone who says to me, I'm thinking about quitting alcohol. And I'm like, well, follow the thread. Like most of the time we don't want to actually follow that thread. because we are afraid we might have to quit it. And we're not seeing what are the indirect benefits we're getting from continuing to do it. So when I quit drinking, I had a bachelor party. I was the MC of a wedding. I was a best man. I had a guys trip, an annual guys trip, like all within 2 months after I was saying, I'm going to stop for a year. I'm going to test it out. That was almost 6 years ago because it was the best choice I ever made. And I remember thinking, why am I afraid of going to these events without alcohol? And it was because I was worried about what other people might say or question or say to me because I'm saying I'm not drinking. The friction it would create in the relationships and also in the way that I connected with a group of, let's say, guys, was we all had beers and chatted and drank scotch and solved the problems of the world and then forgot what we came up with is and that's codependency. I'm worried about the impact on them. So I'm not going to stop drinking this thing. So the same idea is whatever I'm saying on this podcast and you as the listener are like, no, that's not true for me. That's discernment. That's the authority over your own life. I am not the sayer of all truths. This is just what's true for me. And if it resonates for you, great. If it doesn't, great. That's beautiful. That is autonomy. If my work was about you bowing to the thing I say, first off, that's bullshit and narcissistic. But secondly, it would mean that you're not empowered in a relationship dynamic. And as Terence McKenna's quote says, it's anyone worth their weight is about reminding you that you don't need them, And if you're exploring your relationship to social media, well, first off, most people don't even realize that the anxiety and depression they have is likely due to their relationship to social media. So anxiety and depression, the pathology as I see them is that they come due to a lack of expressing one or many of your core emotions. So if you don't have access to anger or grief or excitement or sexual excitement or even disgust, it will start to show up as anxiety. Hilary Jacobs Hendel writes about this in her book, It's Not Always Depression, how anxiety is an inhibitory feeling as well as shame and guilt. So if I don't have access to my voice, I can't direct my life. People see anxiety as a future-oriented thing, right? So if I don't have access to my voice, I can't direct my life. If I can't direct my life, I'm just floating through life. That means I can't predict the future, although based on what I'm currently doing, I can likely predict what pains will come because they'll be the same types of pains. And so I'll feel disconnected from myself, won't be able to trust myself. It'll show up as anxiety, guilt, or shame. And if it doesn't get resolved because I don't wake up, it'll become depression. Depression ultimately is to depress, right? Depress feelings, depress expression. And depression is the perfectly normal response to an environment that feels depressing, right? We think, what's wrong with me that I have anxiety or depression? And I'm saying, what's right with you that you have these feelings? So when I see what I see constantly, anyone who's a small business, entrepreneur, creator, is they are operating with some level of low level to massively high level of anxiety. And it's because they're continuing to play out their childhood wounds that they maybe have resolved or not, that are about, how do I dance for this thing? And I'm losing connection to what is most sacred to me, but it's connected to my survival. Standard pattern relationally. It's just that technology is so new to us. We don't know how to be in relationship with it. So what I'm learning in my time away from Instagram is, should I go back there, I have to have a complete strategy of how I do that so that I am not fucking with my own health in any way. That the moment I sense that in my body, it's what's the boundary and what's the need? Now, I was thinking before, I don't think anybody can have a healthy relationship to social media. I've had social media managers, and I could tell you with certainty that all 4 of them eventually hit some sort of psychological strain from managing social media and feeling, because it's there 24/7, they're in charge of comments, they're in charge of all the things. And I'm like, well, if you just hire someone to manage your social media, are you just subcontracting a relationship to a narcissist? You're like, I won't date him, but you hang out with him. He's great. Or she. But I've actually started to think there just needs to be principles that allow, usually what I would say is probably a young person who likes social media, to actually make it so their mental health is completely prioritized over everything else. And I wonder, because I haven't gone there yet, but I likely will, is like, I want to build the most integrous way of leading that so that everybody who touches social media has a toolkit and systems so that they can still use it as a business generating space, but they do it from a place that feels really nourishing for them. Because if it's not nourishing for you, your content is not nourishing for people. And that's where I got to. It's like, I was writing from a have to. I was creating from what will do well now. When I did stuff from my heart, the algorithm was like, yeah, like you don't have a fancy hook at the beginning. And then you have the skill set of actually building good short form content. Like, how do you actually write? If you want to be a good writer, you got to learn how to write. If you want to be good on video, you have to be good. So there's like actually a skill set that I think I resented that I would have to learn in order to dance for this thing. Well, if you said to me, Mark, become the most exceptional keynote speaker, I would have no resentment to figure out how to do that. So it shows you like there's more of an emotional response from me to social media that is an unresolved relational thing. That is just a resentment that I have to, versus like, oh, what a beautiful thing that this entity or beep boop computer is actually saying you can get better at this thing. And we're telling you how, because this system or machine is saying, we know how human behavior works because we've got trillions of data points. So you can either figure it out or not. So there's that. And I think last is that's attention spans are getting much shorter. And behavior of followers is getting much different. Like I was talking to someone who works at Meta last week, and she's incredible. She's great. She's like aware of the machine. And she was saying, people are just watching videos now and not following. Like very small percentage of people who see a reel actually follow the creator. And she said, so the engagement of it is much different. And she was like, Meta thinks that it's still a social media platform. And she said, but a lot of us who work here know that it is a business platform. And I was like, well, that's very different, right? And so if it is a way that you're creating a funnel, because like all businesses you have how you source clients, you have how you deliver to them, and how you retain them. Anytime your business is suffering, you have a problem in one of those three places. So to like scale a business, you have to obviously get more clients. So how do you do that, right? And if you're not using a platform like Instagram, you got to find another place to do it. You have to, or else your business will die. So I think for the mental health of all businesses and creators, there's going to be specific ones that are, Instagram's a necessity, quote unquote. But I think everyone should diversify how they deliver, or else they're dependent on one thing. And one thing I'll say is I was talking to my friend Amy Wong, and she's a brilliant teacher. And she has a social media presence, but it's not anything like, she doesn't put a lot of time into it. And she would say that. But she was saying to me that she invested, when she was writing as an author, she invested in social media heavily because she was told if she wanted to be an author, she had to have a significant social media platform. So she invested tons of money and resources and time, and it just like wasn't sticking, and it felt so heavy for her. She said, when I finally just let it be what it was and did it when I wanted to, business started to flow into my life. And I was like, wow, see, like I still keep coming back. There's like something about trusting the call. There's something about trusting the truth. And that's been true my whole life. It's just when you're like, security is correlated to needing to trust, which I know you're in, is like, wait, so I either trust my body or not, and I trust my body and potentially give up what is perceived safety and security financially. And it's like, think about how many leaps from relationship require that. Think about the first leap you did writing. Think about for me, the first time I wrote something. That was this like, there's a future version of me that already exists that knows the path that I'm walking is the way to go. But I keep fighting to try to go the path I think I know. And as my intuition told me when I stayed too long in a relationship formally. I was meditating after and thought, how did I get here? And whatever message came to me was like, at what moment did you think you were God, that you knew better than we did? And it was like, fuck, that's the lesson.
That's beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. It goes back to, you remind me of that metaphor with the red bicycles, manifesting the red bicycle. And what it reminded me of, this is something I've been pondering on because my whole life, even when I got really into manifestation, it's not what it's not my thing. Think of grow rich and just, all the manifestation. How do we actually take thought form into reality? And I found that the biggest limitation around these practices is that they are formed around what I think I want. And
Right.
there's something that life has been showing me and has shown me in the past whenever I was in a relationship and was like, how did I get here? Or my business, how did I get here? Like why I thought I wanted this, or even getting, and I have so many clients who they want to make the big money. They want to, have the followers. They want to have that really well-known brand. And they get there and it's like, oh, and one of the things that in the beginning of my career, when I was helping people to tell their story and to do so in a very external, like, let's get you on Forbes, let's set you on TEDx, like, let's get you tens of thousands of followers, like, let's get you seen. And one of the evolutions in my own work that now I lead with it. It's like, listen, you can have these things, but you're not going to feel good if you don't actually, look within and really look at what is it that you are desiring to create. And even within the context of what do you want is actually the bigger question, which is, what if it's bigger than what you want? And what if it's not what you think? And what if it's actually the thing that you're craving, that your soul is, our soul is just, will be thirsty for that reconnection to the divine. And it will be like looking around, if left unaddressed, like looking around disconnected from that deeper divine connection, that is really like our deep human desire to like be in union with the divine, like it's talking about it, like, wholeness, totality. That's what it ultimately comes down to. And we're disconnected from that. When we're disconnected from ourselves, we just keep kind of like the mind starts to scramble and it starts to create this story about what it thinks it wants. And once you get the car, and once you get the job, and once you get the spouse, or once you have the kid, once you have like whatever that thing is on your vision board, then ... I will feel this way. And it doesn't work that way. And what I've noticed, what I've seen over and over again is, in my experience and the experience of people I've supported, is that truly the most majestic things that have caused the most fulfillment and the most beautiful moments in my life, they were not even on the list of what I thought I would want, because it's beyond it's beyond where my mental body can reach. It's in the realm of soul. It's deeper, it's spirit. And what you were saying about when you start to trust that life provides for you, and that you're being divinely led, as long as you are walking with your integrity and your values and your discernment. Like if you're keeping, you're not betraying yourself, you're not abandoning yourself. If you are with yourself, then you literally can't fuck it up. I mean, that's at least what I believe. Like, it's just, you cannot go wrong, because the choices that you make, it will be in service to what matters the most to you. And if you're operating in service of what matters the most to you, like, your friend who was like, I was trying for social media and then I gave it up and my business started to thrive. It's because you're actually allowing divine intelligence to flow through you. You're not like blocking it through your own patterns and limitations and the habit patterns that form from the thought patterns that you've created and continue to like loop in, which then creates those coagulated like situations that you just keep looping and recreating the same reality. So, anyways, that got really unexpectedly philosophical, but I want to, bring this full circle, because, we started talking about social media. You've done an amazing job, Mark, of dovetailing it perfectly into love and codependency and all the things we wanted to talk about. It fit all in one episode. And what I'd love to, for us to have your perspective on is now looking, one of the recurring threads of everything you've been saying is you need to trust yourself. You need to trust yourself, in different ways, like stop self-abandoning, means trust yourself. Create discernment, trust yourself. That's really what it keeps coming down to. And for someone who's like, yeah, that sounds great, Mark, like sounds cool to say trust myself, but what does that really mean? Can you demystify what it actually means when we say like we need to trust ourselves? What does that look like?
Yeah, it's such a good question because I think of trust as synonymous with worth in that, like, if you don't trust yourself to stand up for yourself, then you won't have self-worth, because what lives at the basis of that is I'm not worthy of being stood up for. So we have to grieve the reality that likely that is sourced from our childhood. So when I ask someone like, what is the thing that you wanted most as a kid and you didn't get? It's usually some iteration of like, to feel understood, to feel safe, to feel like a priority, to feel loved, to feel held, to feel important. And if you look at the basis of all of those things is to be enough for. And so self-trust is about first keeping our word with ourselves. That's actually at the core, the fundamental basis of self-worth, because even like what feeds self-worth is boundaries. But boundaries, when you've never set one, they have to come from nowhere. And so the first time you ever say no to something that's not aligned, you finally say, I'm not going to pursue that unavailable person. I'm finally going to trust my heart. I'm finally going to stand up for me. It comes from a deeper courage, a deeper leap, a leap into that abyss of like, I'm just going to jump off the plane and hope. That actually is where it comes from. But the first time you do it, the feeling is like, well, if they don't like my boundary, then my boundary didn't work. And I'm like, their job isn't to like your boundary. And the boundary's success doesn't mean that staying together of a relationship. You use your voice to hear it. You don't use it to have it affirmed. And so as you leap into the self-expression and say something like a boundary, it feeds self-worth. It feeds self-trust. So now it's a symbiotic system, which means the next boundary comes from the place that I'm enough. Even if it's just a small seed. I said no to dinner on Friday because it doesn't work. Prioritize self. And when we give up, when we say yes to something that's a no, we put ourselves in circumstances we're not supposed to be in. Now, we could argue we're supposed to be in them to give us enough challenges to frustrate us and wake us up, to get aligned, sure. But it's better the concern when someone is accessing no is they're worried that if they say no to something, it might be something that's aligned and they don't want to miss it. And I always say to people, like, there's a great quote that what is meant for you will never miss you, and what misses you was never meant for you. Mm-hmm. And you have to live with that level of trust that it's actually better to say no to a yes than it is yes to a no. And what I mean by that is if you say yes to a no, you end up in circumstances you don't want to be in. If you say no to a yes, you recognize what a yes is. Now, a real simple way to do this, and this is actually through very similar to the healing of any trauma, because, at the core of why we don't trust ourselves is likely due to a fracture, likely outside of us, against us, something unexpected. And so there's that saying that the opposite of trauma is choice. And so you start by keeping small promises to yourself. Now, we might think something like making your own bed is trite, but it's not, because if you say you're going to do that and you do it, you build equity and evidence that you do what you say. So the more you build that up, the next time you're in a relational circumstance that isn't aligned, you now know that when you say you're going to do something, you do it, and that your value is innate. And you have started to cultivate your own value. So now you can't possibly be in relationship with something that, or someone that devalues you. So that could be a substance that you touch that all of a sudden you're like, oh, fuck, I don't feel good after I smoked weed or drank. And your body's going, yeah, you don't, because you're not supposed to be doing it right now. And we're like, no, it's fine. I'll keep doing it. Because, that's what we do. We hang out on Wednesdays and we do half price wine night, or that's how I complain about my life, is sharing crappy Chardonnay. Not that there isn't good. Chardonnay is pretty bad, actually. I don't like it. But I say all that because there is such a deep intuitive trusting that comes, and it starts with simple stuff in the 3D. And that just builds more equity for you to play more 5D chess, which is saying like, hey, if you do this, Like, can you lead? Can you trust? I remember when I first started writing, my coach said to me that I was like, oh, you know what? I can't do it because I forget what I said. My excuse was, but he said, how arrogant of you to believe your dreams are for you. Like, they're for everyone who needs what you have to say. And every time you don't do what you're supposed to do, they don't get the medicine they need. And I was like, way to hook into my codependency to get me to change. But it worked, because all of a sudden I was like, my bullshit is less important than the mission that I have to serve. So self-trust comes from trusting yourself. It's a symbiotic relationship. And the more you do it, the more you can trust yourself. And it's going to be accompanied with grief, because what you're going to see is that you may have never trusted yourself. And the lack of inner trust is never from the self. It's because someone taught you not to trust you.
Yeah, I really relate to what you're saying about the grief. I started doing, womb work a few years ago, and really healing, reconnecting with my womb, reconnecting to the cycles of the moon cycles and whatnot. And there was a ceremony that I did with the woman who was the facilitator, who had been supporting me through, the rebuilding trust with my womb and my femininity. And I remember there was a moment where I just fell to my knees, and I started to cry and cry and cry, just grief running through me from generations of every single time I betrayed myself. Every single time I, slept with somebody when I was not a full yes. Every single time where I overrid my moon cycle, where I was tired and exhausted, and I pushed myself through it anyways so I could be productive. Just like every memory of every time came up, like just was like a movie reel. And I fell to my knees with just a depth of grief, of realizing, just becoming aware of all of that self-betrayal. And it was just so painful. And, thanks to the medicine, I was able to, and I had a facilitator there with me, so I was able to really process that massive amount of grief. But what that experience gave to me, and what it reminds me as you speak into this, is that it showed me why I was avoiding doing that work for all those years. It showed me why it was easier for me to, whatever my equivalent. I never liked Chardonnay, and I never liked drinking over my things, but I had my addiction. I had my addictions. Like maybe the equivalent of that was, eating cookies, or there's things that I
love
that I would
cookies.
do. I know, but probably the naughty cookies, not the ones from the bias.
Yeah.
And or engaging in partying behavior, just distracting behavior, which social media fits under that bucket, where I would just do a lot of things so that I didn't have to sit with the discomfort of really facing and feeling all the ways that I betrayed myself. And so I have a lot of compassion for people who just can't, or like won't, or they're not ready right now. And the healing path is for sure. When I went through that, I also, the flip side of going through that enormous amount of grief, which was, I could totally understand why for years I couldn't face it. But also being on the other side of processing that pain, I felt like so light. And what it did, when the trauma was processed, what it gave back to me was choice. And it was the choice of, who do I choose to, today, who do I choose to be? Like, am I going to keep pushing myself? Am I going to keep opening up my universe to men who don't value it? Am I going to continue to, push myself when I'm not in, when I need to be in my cave? Am I going to continue to say yes when I mean no? And that actually is what opened up a pathway for the real true healing to happen, and for me to have a chance to really like reconnect with myself in a deeper way. And so I wanted to share that story for anyone who's listening. And, I really deeply understand what it's like to want to change and want to be better, and change, patterns of behavior that maybe feel like you've been dealing with your entire life. And I also get that sometimes it is easier to distract ourselves. It is easier to go for the bottle, to go for the scroll, to go for the whatever that distraction looks like, for the food. whatever that looks like for you. But it really is worth, it's worth like dealing with the grief and doing that, because what that does is it
Right.
sets us free to be who we're really here to be. And I think that's, I guess it's worth it. It's uncomfortable as fuck, but it's worth doing the work, and it's worth emerging on the other side. You'll never ever question it again. And as I'm sure your experience with alcohol and being like, why all those years, like you just, once you get it, you just get it, but you got to show
Right.
up. So with all of that, said, then, Mark, as we come up to the full circle end of today's episode, if you have anything to share around what I just shared, you're welcome to it. And also, if you have any parting words to leave with whoever's been listening and who's been on this journey with us, there was a lot that got dropped in here today. So if you have a way to, in your beautiful way in which you articulate, to wrap it all in a pretty little bow, this is the moment. If such a thing is possible, we can certainly try.
Well, I think when we do the healing work, you mentioned earlier about like we can read the book, we could do all this stuff, but like really knowledge doesn't become wisdom till it's integrated. Like to know something is very different than to live something. And if you know something that you're not living, you're not in integrity with your knowledge. And so that means you're continuing to choose behavior because the awareness is there that causes your suffering, that you actually know better. And that's why that Maya Angelou quote is so famous, once you know better, you got to do better. You got to be better. And so there's a accountability we have to ourselves to actually live at that level of integrity. The second thing I'll say is that triggers, when people do the work, they think, okay, well, I'm still triggered. I thought I healed that thing. But triggers are really just radars. And I would say that wherever you are triggered, you are invited to some form of mastery. You're like hypersensitized to a thing that requires a skill set to walk through. So it's like the grief that you were processing, where grief is, love is. There's that saying that grief is love that has nowhere to go. But I would actually say grief is just love. And so it's like the more you open your heart, the more you are synonymously saying, I'm willing to be hurt this much. And so if you have not navigated your suffering and your pain and your trauma and your grief, then you will close your heart off and you will call it a bad Tinder profile, or there's no good people in fucking Los Angeles with 9 million people or whatever the fuck amount of people it has. It's like, so it shows up as these symptoms, but it's really, I'm afraid to touch what has yet been unresolved. So if what lives next to my heart opening is my greatest pain, my heart will only open to the level that it will bump that, to the capacity I know I can hold of suffering. And so that's a familiar cycle I'll stay in, instead of saying, I'm going to actually walk right towards this other thing. I'm going to learn from it so that I can walk by it and honor it. And so, I think that ultimately love is the truth. And that's subjective, of course, because it's our truth. So to love somebody is to tell the truth. And to love yourself is to tell the truth. And so if you want to heal and you want to liberate yourself, you have to be real about who you are and what you choose and what you're missing and what you're avoiding and what you need to learn. And that is someone might call a come to Jesus moment. That's a dark night of the soul. That's a breakdown. I can't keep doing things the way I'm doing them. That's not evidence of you being a problem. That's actually evidence that your body's saying, I'm not going to let you continue to be out of alignment. And so you owe it to yourself. There's no problem with you. I think the challenge is we orient to, because pharma teaches us and lots of things teach us, what's wrong with you that you are doing X, Y, Z? What's wrong with you that you are not grateful for what you have? What's wrong with you that you want more? What's wrong with you that you're living the life you were taught to want and you don't want it? Nothing. What's right with you? And I think when we start to orient to ourselves from this place, like you're a fucking Yoda waiting to just grow, to just become aware. And I think I forget who says this, but it's like at that point, then you become aware of awareness. And that's like a whole different level of starting to think about why you're here and what you're trying to do and the brilliance that lives in your intuition. And when you meet that and you accept that, much like you accepted the awarenesses about the choices you made, which I've done the same, where I'm like, oh my God, I put my body in places that weren't safe, like emotionally, whatever, physically. And it's like, wow, I abandoned myself. I was like willing to put myself in suffering because I was so afraid to confront. I actually believed I was worthy of those moments. And I was like, no, I'm worthy of a no. I'm worthy of treating myself as sacred. And if I treat myself as sacred, then I will not tolerate anything that isn't sacred. And to be fair, you have to then leave it to know it, right? Like you have to step out of integrity to know what integrity is. And that's an ever growing, expanding thing. But it's like, can you take the new lessons of your life that may actually contradict former lessons? Because that's just awareness. That's just growth. That's a sign you're doing it right. So that would be my wrap.
Beautiful. That's an excellent wrap. I'm a fan. It's a wrap I can take a bite out of. Beautiful. Well, thank you, Mark. Today was, there was so many golden nuggets in here, as I'm sure that anyone who's listening would agree. And for those of us who want to, ironically follow you and, learn more from you, can you share where we can find you? And this will all be linked in the show notes.
Yeah, so I do the majority, if not all my work in my own community, which is called Aligned, of course. And the link to that is markgroves.com/aligned. And we open that up every 2 to 3 months and just welcome new members in. And in that is all my coursework. There's all about how do you get into integrity with yourself. There's how to learn through breakups, through dating, through all of these different aspects of the challenges that we have relationally and in life. One of them is called Rediscover Your Wholeness, one of the courses I have. And it's all about really immersing yourself in that journey of really discovering who you are and allowing yourself to reveal that to the world, and maybe slowly, maybe quickly. So you can find me there, the Mark Groves podcast, and also on Substack I write, and also on LinkedIn. And I'm pretty easy to find on both of those.
Beautiful. Well, that will all be linked. And for those of you who really love this episode, let us know, whatever. It's so funny to be a screenshot, come on social media, or whatever your media of choice is. Share with us what you really loved about today. And thank you so much to each and every one of you for tuning in and listening to this amazing conversation. And Mark, thank you for coming on and sharing your wisdom. I appreciate you.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it. And thanks for trusting me with your audience. Thank you to you, listener. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, beautiful humans, for tuning into today's episode of It's Not What You Think. If you loved what you received today, make sure to subscribe so that you don't miss out on future episodes, and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, as it helps us reach even more amazing listeners like you. If we aren't already connected on social media, come receive even more tips and inspiration by following me on Instagram at Celinne Da Costa, or visiting my website at CelineDaCosta.com. After listening to this episode, I invite you to take a few moments to reflect. What stood out to you? What were your key takeaways or breakthroughs? And if there was one action step you could take from this, what would it be? Thank you again for joining me on this journey. I'm sending you so much love, and I can't wait to connect in the next episode. Until then, keep sharing your unique gifts and living out your most magical life.